Andrew, who's calling in from Michigan. We got two Andrews. So Andrew from Michigan, you are now live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
How you guys doing tonight?
Very well. Doing great. Having a good time.
I'd like to say to Seth Andrews, it's been a pleasure watching a lot of your videos, and my condolences to everyone who also has family members of the Red Hat Taliban. But what I was calling about to talk about tonight was, having a Christian background has kind of jaded me on religion. But I can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? It's like I just feel like there is something there, and it's not so much that I'm not sure if there's a God or not. Like I know, I firmly believe that there is. I wouldn't call it a God. I would say more like a source of consciousness. Maybe something more science-based, something that let's put it in the context of like say the multiverse or some string theory when they talk about other dimensions and how these things like we could possibly have like our consciousness be some sort of energy, like the way they describe a soul, and that there's more to it. That having been said, I reject everything any religion has ever said on the subject, and I don't think that that there's so much a God who's responsible for it all, rather than a source of consciousness, and that is a byproduct of the universe we live in.
What makes you think there's a conscious source out there? I'm curious.
Well, I've had a lot of experiences that make me question, that there could be no meaning to all this, that it's all random. We just happened, things that, for instance, I've always had a certain connection to a couple of numbers my entire life since I was very little. And when I was 35, those numbers kind of came into focus in a really special way. I had one child who was born on 11/15, and those were the two numbers, 11 and 15. Other than that, I tried DMT one time, and I came away from it thinking, wow, there's just got to be something there. And I think,
listen, I'll be fully candid with you. As someone who has also tried DMT, you can come to a lot of conclusions about things that are not true. I will say that much. But I get it. Like, I get the idea that, there's these like meaningful things that, it seems like, oh, this is too much to be a coincidence. This is just really crazy. I've had some numbers like that in my life too. But like, to go from, there's some numbers that seem to pop up, to say the universe is the byproduct of a conscious being. Like, to me, that there's not enough there, right?
The universe. No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying that the universe is a byproduct of a conscious being. I'm saying that there is a source of consciousness that we come from that is a byproduct of the universe.
Oh, okay, I must have mixed that up when you said
know what I mean.
Okay,
right? Not so much a God, you know what I mean, but like there's an ultimate source of our consciousness, or consciousness for all life. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
I've been moving towards being a vegan over the past few years, because I just don't feel like, eating animals is, a good thing. I feel like being moral. And especially.
I'm with you there. I guess that makes me even more curious then, because like, okay, so the conscious, we're kind of all unified in one. In other words, there's like one source for a consciousness. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and that's just sort of my own belief. You know what I mean? Not one source. Well, yeah, one source, but not a single, like a deity in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Just, like we come from something. There is a deeper meaning, and what we do as human beings could ultimately affect, like, say, how well we strength. Like, think of Buddhism and how they think that you have to meditate to achieve a higher spiritual consciousness within your life so that you can become the Buddha, which seems really silly. But I do believe that, you know what I mean, by living a moral life.
Okay. I just want to ask you, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I want Seth to kind of, chime in here because he's our guest. But I want to know let's say maybe there wasn't a grand meaning or a grand purpose or a grand designer. How would we figure that out? In other words, what method would we use to discover that there wasn't a meaning to it all?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm really into science, and you know what I mean. Like I spend a lot of time watching videos by Neil deGrasse Tyson and PBS Digital Studios Space Time, and some of the videos coming out of like quantum loop gravity, and how they're starting to make the assertions that some of these scientific experiments can be influenced by actually paying attention to it. And I know that, some of that has to do with, you know what I mean, like when they're trying to determine between protons serving a particle function or a wave function, and how our consciousness or our observation of it can actually influence it. And I'm not so sure.
You're referring to like the double slit experiment in particular, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And it just, a lot of this starts to make me think that maybe being a strict atheist is kind of closing yourself off to some possibilities. You know what I mean? Because Christianity definitely does, you know what I mean? That's the best way to make an atheist is to, you know what I mean, take an intelligent person and immerse them in Christianity. But, you know what I mean? And I just feel like, you know what I mean? Like maybe there should be consideration that maybe there is more beyond this life, but we have no idea what it is. We should definitely, you know what I mean, contemplate this like they have in some of the Eastern religions. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That even if it turns out to not be true, it does lead you down the path to, humanism and a higher sense of morality.
Okay. Oh, I've been talking a bit here, so I want to give Seth the chance to chime in on this.
Well, there's a lot to unpack. First of all, you can hold to the idea of spirits or some sort of a spirit consciousness out there and still be an atheist. Atheism is, I don't believe in a God.
Right.
I wrote in my book about Dr. Julian Mussolino is a neuroscientist who has a book called The Soul Fallacy. And he has a salient point, I think, where people who talk about the soul or they talk about this sort of spirit energy that impacts us, that drives consciousness, behavior, identity, etc. People like to talk about that as an intangible. It's something, it could be out there. We're not just the machine of the brain and the mind are separate things. There must be some sort of a membrane that's out there that's feeding into us to create our identity and consciousness. But he's got a great point that's a scientific question. That's something that we're like, if something was impacting us and causing us, and brain function is driven by it, which impacts decision and action, that's a scientific question. It's something that we should be able to see and measure. We've been given no reason scientifically to believe that anything like that remotely exists. Beyond that, when you see patterns, and you spoke of the numbers and other things, we have evolved to be pattern seekers. It's the reason we see faces on foreign planets. It's the reason that when we see coincidental events happen, we tend to think that there might be a purpose or meaning or reason, quote unquote, behind it. Pattern seeking has been part of our survival. It's been part of how we have evolved, the way we have evolved. There are a lot of different things that I think are going on. Now, I'm not saying I know. I don't know how the universe began. I'm not going to say that the deistic type of watchmaker consciousness, whatever. I'm not saying it couldn't exist, but we're back to extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence. Right. I think we keep asking the questions, but right now I see no evidence to see that we live in anything but an absolutely natural cause and effect world.
And I agree with you. It's more of a feeling, and there is some evidence that there's a lot more to our brains than the wet work. Like for instance, Sam Harris talks about how after I can't remember the name of the surgery, but where they sever the link between the left and right brain, and how the two lobes of the brain work independently, and it doesn't. It's very confusing, and I have a real hard time believing that it's actually two people. Even though the evidence is that it's almost like two completely separate personalities, and that just it seems very strange, and I don't know where it sits, and I just still feel like there's more to life than like you say, and
it is a strange thing. We live in a strange world. When they do that, I believe it's called corpus calostomy. I think is what it is. When they do that, what you're talking about is they sever that middle part of the brain. You have the two separate lobes, and it appears, just explaining for the audience who aren't aware, like it has the appearance of when you kind of blind one side of somebody, that the left side is kind of operating differently from the right side. It's almost like you're talking to two different people. Right. And
you can actually trick the left side with things like you can, like if the when someone Sam Harris explained it in the book. How
anyway, what I was going to say with that is we definitely don't fully understand consciousness, and depending on who you talk to, there are different levels of consciousness that we already experience, even through like AI that we've created and stuff. Like you can make an argument that if you have a smart thermostat in your house, that is conscious on some level, because it's an autonomous thing responding to its environment on inputs based on its kind of own accord. No human is making that happen. Once it's on, it's kind of doing its own thing. So like that's arguably one level of consciousness, and philosophers and scientists have been studying this for a long time. But to say that there's a grand consciousness to it all, to kind of say that there's a purpose and design in individual people's lives, to me, like that goes almost even beyond what we can demonstrate through science. It's not as an atheist, that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily close to the idea that there could be something grand or some grand creator or something beyond the lives of humans that's conscious. It's just, I'm not going to accept any belief that I come across until I find some evidence for it, because there's a lot of claims out there, and most of these claims are not mutually incompatible with each other in a lot of ways. So like, until somebody can demonstrate to me like, yeah, there is something grander, and here's the method of how we do that, I'm like, coincidences and just things that I find personally meaningful are just not enough to convince me, right? Yeah.
Well, I definitely don't believe in a creator. I would say that if anything, if there is some sort of consciousness, or even if it's a collective after this existence, this physical existence, that it's more a byproduct of the universe rather than, the source of it. But that's just my own, that's just my own belief. Like, I think our consciousness is another scientific byproduct of a deeper, a wider, just a bigger universe than what we know. Like I say, science definitely alludes to other dimensions in string theory and some of the other beliefs, other theories that they cannot yet prove, but that they've had these beliefs before on a lot of things in science, and things have panned out. And I think that there may someday be evidence that there's life beyond this physical existence. And especially you have to separate AI from actual life, because I would say that any meaningful life in this universe would be categorized as something that can experience emotional emotions, or an emotional.
The time traveling robots
love,
from
hate.
2100 might disagree with you, but we'll have to see when we get to that point, right?
Right. Well, I mean, an AI would be, until it actually has an emotional response to something, it's still just a digital entity with no actual consciousness, because it doesn't have any wants or desires. It doesn't experience love or hate.
You know, I want to try to wrap things up so we can just get to one more caller here. But I will say, Andrew, when it comes to emotion, you know, that's another thing that that could be a very subjective response. I don't know. I think we might change our minds if AI becomes developed enough for us to kind of blur the lines, so to speak, on how we define that. I'm not as you know, I don't know. I think that there may be some opportunity there, but we do want to try to wrap things up. Thanks again for calling. It was a really interesting conversation there, Andrew. Thanks for calling in, and appreciate it. Hope you have a good night. Yeah, interesting stuff. Like you said, lots to unpack with that call. Definitely a lot of different directions we could have taken it, Seth. But I don't know. I still am just like anything beyond what we can experience. You know, like he said, for example, we may have evidence of a life beyond kind of this plane, and I wouldn't know what that would look like. You know.
You know, when you start throwing out multiverse and string theory, and now we're getting into, you know, this wild conjecture. And I heard the word I think that one day maybe we might, you know, this is all speculation. This is not, I mean, this is belief, but it has not been demonstrated. And I think all we're asking is for someone to demonstrate it. And I think these remain scientific questions. And even if we get into emotion, now again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but if we look at the brain as simply a computer doing calculations, and as AI continues to increase, I mean, who's to say it's not possible for a machine to develop a sort of, neural empathy center in some way, you know, to begin to operate on, let's call it an emotion, some kind of emotional level. I mean, who really knows? I mean, the future's. But at the end of the day, the machine of the mind is still an organic thing that's operating in the physical world. We can see how the brain has evolved over the course of humankind, et cetera. These remain scientific questions. And I think, and we might one day, I mean, those are interesting questions, but they don't constitute knowledge.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm in the same boat there. Well, folks, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, so we're going to go a little bit past 8:30. We're just going to take one more call,